Okay, so welcome everyone to this very special screening of the film Coded Bias by Shalini Kantayya, who will actually join us as well for a Q&A right afterwards. It's really exciting to see the representations of everyone here. I'm Nadav Asor. I'm the director of the Ammerman Center for Arts and Technology here at Connecticut College. And I'd just like to take a couple minutes to kick things off. First of all, by extending a warm welcome, a warm thank you to John McKnight, the Dean of Institutional Equity and Inclusion at the college, and his entire office staff who made this incredible Elevate conference that this is a part of happen in record timing. We're definitely taking notes at the Ammerman Center for the events that we produce. It's been really great experience this past day, and it continues tomorrow. I'll leave the introductions to the actual film and filmmaker to a wonderful student and faculty fellow that will both talk to you in a moment. But I just wanted to take this opportunity to also let you know about another event in which we can hopefully continue the conversations that are started in this conference and particularly in this screening. And it's basically the third event, the first in the spring semester, but the third in the annual series of our colloquium series for this year, of the Ammerman Center's colloquium series called Breakout. Our guest at that event will be Ingrid Lefleur, will be beaming straight from South Africa, where she's based these days. She's a curator, artist, pleasure activist, former mayoral candidate for the city of Detroit, and Afrofuturist, whose mission is to ensure equal distribution of the future, exploring the frontiers of social justice through new technologies, economies, and modes of government. So in her talk, she'll address how we can eradicate anti-Blackness now and into the future and envision alternate decolonized futures. So her talk will be just in a couple of weeks from now at 5:15 p.m. on Monday, February 15th, right? So please, we have a link in the chat. Stay in touch with the Ammerman Center, whether through our website, our social media platforms, and so on, to keep posted on that and on follow-up events the rest of the semester. So without further ado, now I'd like to welcome our faculty fellow, Professor Linnéa Hussein from the Film Studies Department, to introduce the film that we're about to watch. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Nadav. And thank you, Nadav and Steve and John, for organizing it. And I can't believe on a Monday night, we have close to 95 or so participants during the break, which is pretty amazing. I would like to introduce this film and by saying that, well, first of all, reminding you the filmmaker will be with us afterwards, so please stick around and we get a chance to ask us some questions. I have some questions and then you all can chime in for a Q&A. So basically this documentary follows an MIT researcher called Joy Bulawini, and who discovered that these algorithms that we're all relying on work on the premise of racial bias. Like they're fed these big data sets that we're all familiar with by now. If maybe some of you have seen The Social Dilemma, you might remember how much of our personal data we volunteer on an everyday basis, unknowingly or maybe knowingly. And this documentary really takes that research one step above and says, well, what are the social injustices that are re-perpetuated through these algorithms that are allegedly objective or modern or above, human error, and says that on the contrary, they really reinforce gender bias, they really enforce racial bias. So really makes us think about the socioeconomic consequences of just blindly trusting these big corporations and algorithms that by now dictate our lives, whether or not we can get credit, whether or not we get in college, whether or not we get a job, and so on and so forth. I think this is a particularly well-suited documentary for Connecticut College, because it really brings out the importance of liberal arts, I would like to say, because it's not just about technology, right? It's really the bringing together of arts and technology that this documentary really shows is necessary to create an equitable future with technology. So we would like to ask you all to actually watch the film on the link that John just posted, and there's a passport for it, just because streaming through Zoom can sometimes be a bit iffy. But if you could all meet us back here, and we're trying to do this as synchronous as possible, so let's see if we can actually do it. But if we could all meet back here on Zoom, and you can leave your Zoom open, just mute yourself, make sure it's muted. If we could be back here at 8:35 p.m. and then it will be me and Shalini and everyone else, and you get a chance to answer and to ask some questions about the film. Did I forget anything? No. So I wish you all a lot of fun. It's a very powerful documentary that I think will bring up lots of questions for you and lots of things to think about and unpack. And I'll see you all in about an hour and a half. Enjoy.
And everyone, please keep your Zoom open if you can. We'll just all mute ourselves and make sure everyone is muted, but that way you'll hear us when it's time to come back.
Yes. Okay. Well, welcome back. I would like to briefly introduce our Ammerman scholar, Tatiana Weiner, who will introduce the filmmaker, and then it'll be me and the filmmaker talking. So Tatiana, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Nice. So I have the honor of introducing Shalini Kantayya, and her film Coded Bias premiered at the 2020 Sundance Film Festival for critical acclaim. She directed the season finale of the National Geographic television series Breakthrough, executive produced by Ron Howard, broadcast globally in June 2017. But her debut, Catching the Sun, premiered at the LA Film Festival and was named a New York Times Critics' Pick. And Catching the Sun released globally on Netflix on Earth Days 2016 with the executive producer Leonardo DiCaprio, and was nominated for the Environmental Media Association Award for Best Documentary. Kantayya is a TED Fellow, a William J. Fulbright Scholar, and Associate of the UC Berkeley Graduate School of Journalism. Wild. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Tatiana, and welcome, Shalini. We're very excited that you're here with us, and I'm still very excited that we're over 100 people on a Monday night doing winter break, which is very exciting. Thank you so much for this really powerful and important, timely documentary that you made. I have a couple of questions, and then we can open it up to the audience. For all of you who have a question or are thinking through a question, if you could use the Q&A function, not the chat box, and then we can monitor it and see what Shalini can answer after. So again, this is so important, and I said before we started the film how great this is for Liberal Arts College and for the Ammerman Center in particular, a center that deals with the intersection of art and technology, right? To really think through the importance of the liberal arts, of critical thinking, and so on for the design of technology going forward, if we want to achieve some sort of equity in the future. And I was really amazed at your documentary, because this is a documentary about AI, about tech. You don't see a single tech bro. You don't see Bill Gates, you don't see Mark Zuckerberg, you don't see Steve Jobs. And I think in that way, I really think your visual language as a documentary filmmaker kind of mirrors the message of the film. And I was particularly struck by the scene in which Joy is interviewed in the hair salon, which is such an unusual image of who we picture, our own bias when we picture an AI designer or a researcher. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your process, about working with Joy and the other women, but also how you went about as a documentary filmmaker trying to tell the story, or what was your thought process? If you could talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me and for screening Coded Bias and sort of inviting a platform for conversation. I'm thrilled to screen it to you. I didn't really set out to make a film that centers the voices of people of color and of women, although I tend to be someone who's very thoughtful and conscientious about whose voices I amplify in the films that I make. But it was actually the research itself that kept taking me back to these sort of brilliant and brave, mostly women, mostly people of color. And I think what the cast of Coded Bias has in common is not only are they incredibly astute, they're sort of the smartest group of people I've ever talked to. I think there's something like 7 PhDs in the film, but they also had a marginalized identity. They had an identity that wasn't centered. They were women, they were people of color, they were LGBTQ, they were Jewish, some sort of religious minority where their experience was not centered. And it allowed them to sort of see the blind spots in the technology that the tech bros often miss. And I think for me, everything that we know from AI is for one tech bro or the other. I mean, everything I know about, I didn't know maybe 3 years ago what an algorithm was or what AI, everything I sort of had known about AI had come from the brain of the imagination of Steven Spielberg or Stanley Kubrick or one of these like sort of science fiction directors. And what I learned in the making of Coded Bias is that AI is not science fiction, but something that is being deployed right now. And already this sort of invisible gatekeeper, oftentimes the first sort of entry point deciding who gets hired, who gets healthcare, who gets undue police scrutiny. And I think what I learned through Joy's research and the research of others in the film is that these same systems have not been vetted for racial bias or for gender bias or for discrimination, or that they'll not do unintended harm, or that they even have a shared notion of accuracy, because we haven't decided on any of that as a culture. We essentially have no laws here in the US. And that's when I began to realize that these opaque systems that we often can't see, sometimes we don't even know when an AI has been involved in denying us an opportunity, can sort of have this way of rolling back civil rights. Because everything that we sort of love as people of a democracy, everything that all the advances we've made over 50 years, fair housing, equal employment, all of the things we sort of have fought for that are advances in a civil society could sort of be rolled back by machines that we think are neutral and are not. And that's when I began to see what a massive issue this is that's going to really touch every aspect of society.
Absolutely. And I think you're hinting at something that could be like a whole documentary spin-off in itself, right? Whether you just think of the situation in Hong Kong or, facial recognition for immigration purposes and so on, right? Like, so there's so many things, and we're really like, my brain hasn't stopped thinking since I started watching this film. And as I guess the other question before I turn over to the audience that I had was, I kept thinking, how do we dismantle the master's house with the master's tools kind of thing? And I think Audre Lorde would have an answer to that. But, what can we do? I really, really like on your website, for everyone who isn't aware, maybe someone can put the website in the chat. There's an activist toolbox. There's also discussion guides, study guides. And so if you could, talk a little bit about how best case scenario you envision the life of this documentary. How can teachers, how can students get involved? What would you like to see happening?
Yes, I mean, there are a lot of, if you go to the code, I just threw it in the chat, the codedbias.com website, there is a take action page that has a lot of free reading. It has all the books, all the authors in the film. It has links to great organizations that are doing this work. I think people often think about, what can I do? And I often say like, well, Blue Jeans is a little better than Zoom, and Signal is a little better than this. It's like the same thing of the master's tools. But I think we really need systematic change, and that calls for collective action. And I think there are a lot of great organizations with very little resources that have done a lot of outstanding work, like Big Brother Watch in UK, where you have a handful of committed young people who have literally stopped the police from using real-time facial recognition. And now you don't even have to go to the meetings. You can just show up for a Zoom. That's civic participation. And so it feels like a real moonshot moment. In June, we had the 3 biggest tech companies change their policy towards selling facial recognition technology to law enforcement. And that was a sea change that we never thought was possible by IBM. Microsoft said that they would stop selling it to law enforcement. Amazon said they would take a 1-year pause. I still think it's a problem that the tech companies get to decide, that it's actually possible for big tech to sell directly to ICE, to the FBI, and to law enforcement with no one we elected overseeing it. It was like the one time I ever saw Jim Jordan, Republican from Ohio, agree with AOC, Democrat from New York. And it was around this idea that tech companies shouldn't be allowed to sell directly to law enforcement. And I saw legislators on both sides of the aisle be terrified by that prospect. And so, it's great that they did this. It shows how much power we have, because that sea change was made possible because of the brave scientists in my film, like Joy Buolamwini and Timnit Gebru and Deborah Raji, who speak, we know the importance of science speaking unencumbered by corporate interest. So that's part of it, that they put their reputations on the line and let themselves be vulnerable to big tech, which is not easy to do. And then, it was engaged people in the streets. In the largest movement for civil rights and equality that we've seen in 50 years, with the movement, with the Black Lives Matter movement and Justice for George Floyd movement. And so people made the connection between racially biased, invasive surveillance technology and the inherent value of Black life and communities getting undue police scrutiny and being subject to undue harms as a result of and that being compounded by technologies like facial recognition. And while that happened, we still don't have any laws. So in Detroit, you had a man who was, because this stuff is in secret. I mean, I was able to capture those cases in the film in the UK because there are laws and there's some transparency, and human rights observers are notified, and there's this whole system that you can see that you can't see here in the US. And so here in the US, we know for the first time, it was revealed, because again, here these technologies are used in secret, that a Detroit man was, of course, a Black man, was held, arrested in front of his family and his neighbors, the kind of stuff you don't really recover from, held for 30 hours in a cell, and never asked for his license because of facial recognition. And it came out it was because of facial recognition. And still the Detroit police is continuing to use this technology. And Big Brother Watch in UK, again, where we can have statistics because we don't have them in the States, did a study, and I don't have the exact numbers, but I'm citing a conservative number here because I think it's upwards of this. And I think they had 85% misidentifications of people by police. And so you see the harms that these systems can do, but also that people have the power to change them. And not just people like Joy, who went to MIT, but people like Daniel Santos, a school teacher who was arbitrarily graded as a bad teacher by an algorithm. You can meet this teacher for 10 minutes and know he was a good teacher. This teacher will make you cry, like with his dedication to his students, Daniel Santos, just such a committed teacher. You could feel it from 10 miles away. And yet an algorithm called him, said that he needed discipline, and he fought it and could prove that it was arbitrary and that was it was a black box. But yet we're trusting these machines with impunity and saying, no, the computer is always right, except the computer isn't right. And so, and you can see, in cases where even when the programmers had the best of intentions, that sometimes these machines can pick up on systematic inequalities in the data. Amazon was trying to build a system that made the world more fair. It was like, let's take people out of the hiring process and we'll just have the machine vet people, by the resume. And lo and behold, the algorithm discriminated against anyone it could discern was a woman, because it was looking at history of employment, who was hired, who had job retention, who got promoted over a period of years. And it was picking up on systematic inequalities in the data. And so it goes to show just how dangerous these systems are, and that we need to have humans in the loop to make sure that these systems don't become these deterministic models that replicate past inequality.
Absolutely. And I think if we just look at the WhatsApp debate right now, we see it is possible in certain countries to have laws, right? Like it doesn't have to be made through corporations. It could be governmental oversight or something, or whatever that might be.
Absolutely. I mean, we're just been taught that there's one way that these systems can work, which is a stunning lack of imagination, that surveillance capitalism and them having big tech having limitless, unlimited, unpaid access to our personal data that they profit from. Of course, they say we get free services out of it, but there are many ways in which these systems can work. And I didn't realize that until I started talking with some of the thought leaders in the film, and they made me realize how our imagination has been limited around these technologies and how they could work.
Yes. So let's turn to our Q&A. I know, Nadav, I haven't read yet, so should I just pick one, or does anyone have a favorite yet? Should we go in order?
Well, I guess I can just say I'm seeing a question about it there, and it kind of connects to what you guys were talking about. That the recent January 6th, right, kind of insurrection at the Capitol is interesting in that suddenly, right, because it was suddenly white people involved, or largely. Suddenly that did seem to prompt this discussion, right, both around deplatforming, but also around surveillance and around, and there's a question about this here, around also basically different ways those technologies can be utilized. The person asking the question here was asking about using them to de-radicalize people. So it's kind of like, I guess, surveillance inverted, but also, I'm curious about whatever thoughts you have or connections you, or maybe people also in the algorithmic justice.
I think, to me, some of the root issue here is that a lot of those groups are organizing online, and also Facebook, Google, these platforms are not held to the same standards and practices that I am as a journalist, as an independent journalist, because of Section 230, that makes them technology platforms and not news media platforms. It means that they're not responsible for the speech on their platforms being true. So in other words, if you say something about me on Facebook that is liable, I can sue you, but I can't sue Facebook for allowing that. And it creates a lot of issues. part of what I do in my work as a documentary filmmaker is journalism. So I have a lot of actual respect for the truth. The other part of what coded bias is science communication. And I have a lot of respect for science. And we see that, we have hard problems to solve that are complicated. And we just need a basic set of common facts, like we have a democratically elected president that has been vetted in all 50 states by every court and by all standards, has been democratically elected by a sound election. And yet part of the issue is that one sector of the society is not getting the same information. And that's creating, it used to be that we had sort of a common culture. And you see it even in generations, because people like who grew up in a certain generation, like we have a common culture because we all listened to like what was on the radio. Like it was like all on the radio. It was all like what was on this common culture that we have. And with the internet, it's become so fractured that we don't have sort of a common reality about what's happening. And to me, the root cause is trying to hold technology companies available for accountable for telling the truth. I am accountable for telling the truth. When I broadcast coded bias, I have to vet my film. And because I talk about tech companies, I had to vet my film a lot. And I had to go through a huge vetting process with a lot of facts. And so I think understanding that, and I think, college students, I often work with college students, and I often have to explain that Google is not the same as a library, that it's an advertising platform, that what you see is sort of biased, that your world, that Google is not the same as your college library. And so the precious resource that you have of having access to a college library and the way information is organized and how it cannot be predatory because the logics of how that information is organized is transparent to you. All of that becomes more important, and understanding that you can't find all information on a Google search or on a Facebook query, that there's some times where histories are complicated, facts are complicated. We've got to look at things from different angles. There are histories that are disputed. And I think like this whole kind of Google, Facebook phenomenon makes you think that everything is sort of right there. If you're talking about a conflicted history, oh my God, Kashmir and the Kashmir border, Israel and Palestine, you're talking about contested histories. These people have this history, this people have this history. You have to look at all these facts together and maybe sit in an uncomfortable place. And I think that we're losing that complexity and that nuance around our information systems. And that's part of what's happening with, I think, the QAnon and it's the simplification of us and them. Because, one of the things I feel really in defense of that I really am always excited about is civic dialogue. I've talked to tech companies about this film. Some of the companies I critique in the film have invited me to the table, and we've had a conversation. And I listen to them if they listen to me. And I think that I think that what's precious in a democracy is our differences, that we think differently, that we might have different perspectives, that we might have different histories and biases. And so what is concerning is right here, we have a chance for civic dialogue, a safe space, a place where we can ask questions that are tender and that are vulnerable and that might have multiple answers. On the internet, it becomes very simplified. And we all just need to be aware of that. And the more that we can try to find each other again and try to also seek out people who think different than us, because that's the other thing the algorithm does, is like it gives us more of what it thinks that we want. And that keeps us in this silo. And I really hope that what happens is that we start to talk to each other again. And so that's maybe a long-winded reflection on what's happening in our country around January 6th.
Yes. Well, you still managed to keep it short. There's a lot more to say about that.
Nothing is quite short.
But I'm gonna put together a few of the questions which I think kind of speak to the same topic of AI and Zoom and teaching and facial recognition. And I think when you talk about academic freedom, just today in the New York Times, there's an article about what happens to the Israel-Palestine debate once you put it on Zoom and Zoom decides who can be a speaker, who cannot be a speaker, who's, as you say, contested, right? What kind of debates can you have? Will that be decided by big tech? And so we have some questions here. About the quiet change that the one expert in the documentary talks about, right? What if we are unaware, and this is kind of sneaking up on us? And then that combined with the other question, if you could speak about AI on video chat, specifically because of higher education are moving too forcefully, so, right? Because it's not safe otherwise to be using this, right? We're all, I'm recorded as we speak. I don't know what's going to happen with it. So
the truth is, we don't have any laws around this. This is the issue.
Mm-hmm.
And now you shouldn't have to choose between going to math class and having a company have your data forever, and so this is the issue that we all have to have and get savvy about is, because how many of you guys read the terms and conditions of Zoom? I did not when I logged in. And so the thing to do would be the kinds of changes that I see being effective are when you ban it on your college or university. And sometimes you can get an organization or, with an institutional power, you can have greater power to make change. Some people are doing it state by state. People are doing it at their universities, state by state banning, because then it starts to ask other questions, because when you ban facial recognition on your college campus, then people are like, why are you banning that? And then people have start to have a question about data and about invasive surveillance. So I think those smaller actions are taking place, and there are lots of great organizations that are also doing work on our website that you can support.
Great. I think we have time for two very short questions, but I think they're important. So we won't keep you here much longer. But one of the questions that comes up is, why do you think it appears that people tend to oppose corporate surveillance much less than government surveillance?
Ooh, I love that.
I think has an interesting historical twist to it.
People think that the tech bros are going to save the world. This is the great mythology that we've created around technology, that technology can solve all of human problems. It is always the best solution. And I think that we believe in these billionaires more than we believe in our government, we the people's ability to solve these issues. And as a result, we don't have and also, we have historical precedents more in the sense of China and the sense of the Stasi. But the truth is, the stuff that Facebook and Google has on us makes the Stasi look like they had a light touch, right? I think they were cute, and I mean, they would love to have this much information about us, and so we just really have to question our trust in corporations, and it's all gamified when you put your face in there, and oh, what will you look like in 10 years? Well, now Facebook knows exactly how you're going to age, and so, and what third-party company are they selling that data to? And so, yes, we should be suspicious of corporate surveillance.
Absolutely. I should have embraced, like 15 years or so, there was an AI thing on Facebook you can click on, and they thought my face was Ray Liotta. and I was outraged, but I thought I should have embraced it for how wrong it was, in a way. So the last question, that is really a good one, I think, to end on is, what other books or documentaries would you recommend to continue to educate oneself? Is there anything else you've seen?
Thank you so much for watching Coded Bias. I hope that you will share it and tell your friends to watch it. It's showing at limited theaters, and you can stream from home on the codedbias.com website. There's an activist toolkit on the website and a discussion guide where you can host a screening with your friends. And I really think students have an amazing power to make change. I would look at Netflix. There's a film called The Social Dilemma. There's another film called The Great Hack that I think everyone should see. Those two films, I think, are also really important. And I hope that you'll continue to watch the film and share it and be part of the dialogue online at codedbias.com. But I think what I want students to know is, like, we have amazing power to make change right now, that we have a moonshot moment to push for ethics and technology, and that our greatest enemy is not actually the tech companies. I think the tech companies can be our partner in this work. I think the greatest enemy is our own apathy. It's caring enough to do something and to act and to get educated. And I think part of this is feeling empowered around AI and not feeling like, oh, it's crazy, it's math, I don't know about it. These technologies are going to impact all of us. So the more that we can educate ourselves and our communities and engage with these issues, I think we have the power to decide how these technologies will be used, and if we use them towards more ethical and humane uses of technology in the future.
Absolutely. And I will also plug Weapons of Math Destruction as one of the books from the documentary for people to check out. But thank you so much, Shalini. Like, we're really indebted to you. And please, everyone, go out, tell everyone what this film, Coded Bias. If you have a sibling at a different school, you want to bring it there, you can also find a link for that on the website. That would be a great way to get the word out. So I will hand over back to Nadav if you have any other words, but thank you so much. It was very nice meeting you.
Thank you so much. And I hope you guys will go to the Take Action page. There's a full reading list, including everyone in the film, on the Take Action page.
Perfect.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, both Shalini and Professor Hussein, for moderating this and asking all these really insightful questions. And thank you to John McKnight and the Office of Institutional Equity and Inclusion for sponsoring this amazing, conference. So this is a part of, and this particular screening. I do want to say to anyone still with us that, especially to students at the college, that anybody who's interested in continuing this conversation within our college, at least, that's part of what our center is for. That's what the Center of Arts and Technology does, right? This approach that you saw. And I loved seeing, Shalini, in your film, the way that so many people from so many different backgrounds were taking this stuff on, and they're kind of, and the computer scientists were making art, and everybody was like doing everything. And that's very much the way it works at Con too, and at our center as well. So definitely anybody who wants to start a conversation or do another screening, go do a workshop, do an event, we're open to all of that. We want to keep that conversation going. So thank you so much, everyone, and have a wonderful night, and hopefully better year.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nadav. Take care.
Mm-hmm.